Great, Marina. That's exactly what I was trying to get at. So yes, there we go. There's the recording. So yes, the respiratory system, we breathe in oxygen, get rid of carbon dioxide, and the plant's relationship to us is that they take in carbon dioxide and get rid of oxygen. So we need to go ahead and learn a little bit more about that. So this is a picture of the lung. This is what our lungs look like. You know, oftentimes we think of them about balloons, but they're actually not balloons. They are a spongy organ. So you're going to see that they kind of go into that system. Their structural organization goes from big to small. So this is that part, and we're going to talk about the different parts of the respiratory system. You will have a chance to practice identifying the different parts of the respiratory system in small group this week. We're going to spend a lot of time in small group going through a simulation, going through practices in the respiratory system. So please make sure to come to that to get a better understanding of the process of how oxygen gets to our lungs and how it gets to the rest of our cells. So, like I said, it is a spongy organ, not a balloon. And this is the front look at the lung, and then this would be if you were to cut it in half. So why does our body need oxygen? So every single action, reaction, anything that you do requires energy. And in order for us to get energy, we need that ATP. This is going back to quarter 2. Adenosine triphosphate is that usable energy that gets broken down from glucose. Remember that glucose is that product of photosynthesis. So plants are autotrophs, meaning they can make their own foods, right? So they take in the sunlight they have oxygen, they have water, they have nutrients, they have carbon dioxide, and that goes into the plant, and that is what is needed for photosynthesis to be taken place. They go through what's called the Calvin cycle, which we learned about in quarter 2, and that produces that glucose. So we need to eat, right? We need to consume. Those are called heterotrophs. We need to consume our glucose. We need to eat our glucose in order to get energy. If you've not eaten for a while and you start to feel really faint, that's because our body doesn't have the fuel. And if we don't have the fuel, we can't break it down to create that ATP. And so what we learned about when we were learning about this process called cellular respiration, which is when it takes the glucose from the sugars and breaks those glucose down into those 3 steps. So if you don't remember cellular respiration, the first step is glycolysis. The second step is the Krebs cycle or the citric acid cycle. And the third one is that electron transport chain. That third step is where that ATP is produced. But in order for the cellular respiration to occur, you need to have oxygen, right? We learned about how there's anaerobic and aerobic respiration. Anaerobic meaning that there is no oxygen present. That's when you're going to go through like the lactic cycle, which is when we are building muscles, and it goes that we deplete the oxygen in our muscles when we're working out. And then the Sam, your joke distracted me. What was I saying? The glycolysis, and then it goes into the the Krebs cycle, right? That's the one where we need oxygen. So the whole entire reason that we breathe, 100% of the reason that we breathe is for cellular respiration. It's for us being able to change from glucose and make that ATP so that our cells can work. And we have trillions of cells in our body, and every single one of them needs to have oxygen in order for us to go through that cellular respiration, creating that ATP, creating that energy for our cells to do what it needs to do. As a result, we get carbon dioxide as a waste product. So we breathe in that oxygen, we bring it to all of our cells. Then the cells use that, and carbon dioxide is a byproduct that's released in one of the steps. And then we have to expel it, right? We have to get rid of it. That's what expel means, to get rid of. And then that means that we breathe it out. And that is the waste product or a byproduct of cellular respiration. And that's how we have this loop. We breathe in oxygen, we breathe out carbon dioxide. So let's take a closer look of how this is done, shall we? So we're going to go ahead and watch this video. I don't know. Let's see if you can. Let's see if there's any. Can you guys hear the volume? Okay. Why? Nope. That did not work. Okay, let's try this again. Okay. Let's watch this video since that video is not working and it's only 3 minutes and 53 seconds. So, or would you rather watch this one? Let's watch the one I have. It's for kids. We'll see how much this is kitty-like. I can't tell if I loved that video or can't stand that video. I think the most distracting thing was his mustache with hands. I don't think I want anyone's mustache to be hands as well, but here we are. It did a very good job of explaining the different parts. So that is, in a nutshell, the respiratory system, right? So we have our trachea, which is where we breathe in, right? We breathe in, the air goes down into our lungs. It goes down the trachea into those two tubes called the bronchi, and then it goes into these smaller tubes called the bronchioles, into these sacs at the end called alveoli. And in alveoli, that's where we start to see that gas exchange. So let me see if this is a good video. It's not terrible. It wasn't terrible. It's just a matter of, attention. I think this is going to be better. It's a little bit more school-ish. Okay, it's 3 minutes. Okay, let's see here. Who? Sam. I don't know who that is. Okay. That wasn't the best, but it did hit a lot of the same information. So it still talked about how that oxygen goes into your mouth, goes through the trachea. Our trachea and our lungs are lined with a mucus that is specifically made to catch any germs that we were to inhale. And that goes, and then they take the cilia, those little hairs, kind of push that out and into the area that disposes of them, while allowing that oxygen to come in through our lungs and then in through the bronchi, the bronchioles, into the bronchi, into the bronchioles, into the alveoli, where the alveoli, they take that oxygen through the process of diffusion. So let's go back to our, because who doesn't stand in the middle of a field, Sam? Whoever, like, why wouldn't you stand in the middle of a field, right? That's my explanation. We've got another video. Yay. This one is, let's copy link URL. This one is going to be a little bit more specific. It's not valid. So we are going to move on. So this was going to talk about the trachea. This was going to talk specifically about how the trachea, this isn't available any longer. How the trachea is that big long tube that is right next to the esophagus. So if you ever, and the esophagus is specific to the stomach. So if you've ever had a situation where you took a bite of something and you swallowed it, or you took a drink of something and swallowed it, and then you started to cough, and it felt like you were like not necessarily choking, but like your eyes start to tear up, you're coughing, it just feels like something went down the wrong pipe is typically the statement that's made. It just went down the wrong hole, the wrong tube. And that's actually accurate. So remember that your esophagus and your trachea are both connected to your mouth. There is one direction for when you're digesting food and you swallow. And when you go through that act of swallowing, you're actually engaging a muscle that opens up the esophagus and closes the trachea. But there are times where if it's just not the right timing, or you swallow before you can, or you breathe in food particles, it goes down your trachea. And that's how people start to choke. That's how people say that it's gone down the wrong tube and they're coughing. A lot of it has to do with the fact that it went down the tube that was specifically made for breathing into your lungs, not the digestive system into your stomach. So those two sit right next to each other as you swallow. Like I said, when you swallow it, it activates a muscle. That muscle closes the trachea, opens the esophagus. Otherwise, when you're breathing, it is going down your trachea. So breathing is, by definition, the act of breathing is really just the movement of air in and out of the lungs. So when you're breathing, you're just moving that air in and out. Respiration, okay, so we also know this word respiration with the term cellular respiration, also known as cellular respiration, and this is the energy releasing reaction that takes place inside of the cells. Oxygen combines with sugar to release energy, that sugar being glucose, right? So when we're talking about respiration, it's actually going through it's like I said, it's bringing that oxygen to create that cellular respiration, breaking the sugar down to usable, Yes, birds' respiration systems are a bit different. First of all, birds don't chew their food. That's why you'll never see teeth on birds. They swallow their foods, and then they actually have things in their stomachs that grind. So like part of it is also the fact that whenever they eat foods, they actually just swallow whatever is there. So there's some that actually get stones in their stomach, and it helps them with grinding the food down. But actually when they swallow, their food gets ground down by a mechanism in their system that by the time it gets to their stomach and they actually go through the processing in the digestive system. But yeah, they have a totally different system when it comes to digestive. I know dino birds, there's no teeth in birds. So fun fact. Anyways, okay. So that does not work either. So these are two separations. So respiration is actually cellular respiration when that glucose gets broken down into usable ATP and releases that carbon dioxide as a byproduct. Breathing is just getting that air. Breathing is just the movement of air in and out of the lungs. Okay. So when we think, I actually didn't know that. Yeah. Nose and mouth. So the path of air. So when we talked about it a little bit in those two videos, when we take a deep breath, right? Our nose or our mouth moistens and heats the air before going into the trachea. Cilia and mucus trap dirt in the air. So that's why if we get like a cold, oftentimes we get a lot of extra mucus because there's a lot of extra germs in our bodies that it's getting rid of. So the nose and mouth is our first point of contact, and it's also our first layer of protection. Then we have the larynx. So the larynx is over here, and it's part of the trachea where our vocal cords are located. And that's pretty much down at the base of the throat, right over here. So the larynx is really where our vocal cords are located. And then the trachea, like I said, is the tube that leads from the nose and mouth to the lungs. The walls have rings of cartilage to protect the trachea and prevent it from collapsing. Not necessarily, bless me. Not necessarily. The trachea mucus is different than the nose mucus. So snot is often, thank you. I know. Snot is often associated with the mucus that's lined in your nose. And then there's a different type of mucus that you can tend to cough up from your trachea. So it's not like it, yeah. And then you do have postnasal drip, which is really gross, but that's a whole different thing, which, you know, here we are. So, and yes, I am congested. I do have extra mucus because it's allergy season. So I'm suffering from allergies this morning. Anyway, okay. So as we move forward, so are there any questions on the nose, mouth, the larynx, the trachea? This is the pathway of how oxygen travels into our body. Okay. All right. Next, it goes from the trachea to the bronchi. So remember the bronchi, yes, it is. The trachea splits into right and left bronchi, each one leading into your right and left lung. Each bronchus, which is the singular of bronchi, leads air into the lungs and divides into smaller and smaller tubes, like a tree trunk divides into smaller and smaller branches. So that goes all into, it goes from bigger to small, right? So it goes from one trachea into the bronchi, which is a bit smaller, and then you go into the bronchioles, which are even smaller. And then we've got those alveoli. So the alveoli are the grape-like structures at the end of the bronchi. And this is where the oxygen actually meets our red blood cells. Now, we haven't really talked about red blood cells all that much, but red blood cells are, you know, when we think about cells, we think about blood cells, we think about these red ones, and they have this protein in them called hemoglobin. And we're going to get to that in just a second. But here is a picture. So one thing that I want to point out is the red is the oxygen-rich blood, meaning it has oxygen, right? And then oxygen-poor blood is blue, and that's when it does not have oxygen. So it's coming back to get more. We talked about a couple of these things. This picture is a lot more detailed than the steps we just went through. But to give a visualization, we talked about how the air is going to enter the mouth and the nose. So we've got this connection, which we already know. And we know that there is this connection piece between the nose and our throat. And so we've got our, we're not going to go through everything because it's not necessary, but knowing that we've got the pharynx, which is the throat. So that is literally this part right here. And then you've got that larynx, and that's those vocal cords I was just talking about that sit at the base of your neck. And that's exactly what I was saying right here. These right here, this is the trachea, that one big hole behind it. Actually, you can see that there is the esophagus is hidden in this picture. But here's the trachea, that big tube where the air goes down. And then these are the bronchi. These are the ones that it breaks into the right and left lung. Remember that we are looking at somebody's, the reason why the left lung is on the, well, Sam, we are fragile. So I got to take care of ourselves. The reason that the left lung is on the right side of the page is because if you were to turn around and face the way that this image is facing, that would be their left, which is why it gets a little confusing. But keep that in mind. So as the right lung bronchiole goes into the right lung, it then breaks down to the bronchioles. Excuse me. The bronchioles are these small tubes, just like these little tubes that you see here. And then they go into those little red dots that are all over. Those would be the alveoli. And that's the site of where you guys are so funny. You're distracting me. That's the site of the gas exchange where oxygen gets into all of the cells, okay? So here's a big visualization of all of that information that we just learned, okay? Okay. We also have this part of it that's called the diaphragm, and we learned about this in one of the videos, right? The one with the mustache hands. So the diaphragm is this dome-shaped muscle that's just under the lungs and that moves to inflate the lungs with air. So a lot of it has to do when we breathe in. If you're a singer, they're going to tell you to breathe into your diaphragm. And really what that's doing is you're filling your lungs and the alveoli with so much air, it's pushing down on that diaphragm. And that diaphragm is actually a muscle. So if it contracts the muscle, when you let it go, it's also going to release more carbon dioxide. That's why meditation tends to be really, really powerful. Not only does meditation allow you to slow down the moment, it allows you to focus on your breath, but it also really increases that ability to bring in oxygen and release carbon dioxide, which is a toxin in our body. And so if we breathe in that extra oxygen just by focusing on your breath a little bit more, you get more oxygen into your lungs than if you were to just passively be breathing. So just keep that in mind. That's why a lot of people have moved to meditation. Yoga is a big part of that because it uses the breath. It works with the breath to increase the oxygen to our bodies, to increase that power and that energy that we need to do the function of whatever we're doing. And then it also increases the removal of carbon dioxide from our bodies, which is just a really good thing for the health of our lungs. And yes, Sam, we are going to take a look at a pair of lungs. If you don't want to see it, you can look away. But I want to bring your attention to this picture because it's pretty shocking. I think that it's very arbitrary, right? We know that smoking is bad, but we don't really realize how exactly it's affected us until you see an image. So the one above is the lung of a smoker. And the one on the bottom is of a non-smoker. And obviously we want our lungs to look like this, but every single time that we inhale air pollution, wherever we are, we're getting a little bit of toxins in our bodies. And that's inevitable. There is no such thing as pure air, unless you go to a specific location where they've made it that way. But a lot of the time, there's a lot of toxins. That's why when we talk about air pollution, that's when we talk about secondhand smoke. Anytime that you inhale, it's going into your lungs. And that's the first thing that's going to be affected. So keep that in mind when you are making decisions and advocating for things, because clean air is incredibly important. And I think that we, living here in Oregon, are really, really lucky. Because one thing that we take for granted is the trees and how much nature we have and just how many trees we have around us. We don't really have an opportunity to understand that we are breathing some of the freshest air. That's why when you go on hikes and when you go out into nature and into those forests, you feel like the air is different. It's crisper, it's cleaner, and that's because there's more oxygen in the air in those areas. Now, I grew up in Chicago, right outside of the city of Chicago, and there's forest preserves, but nothing like what we have out here. And when you go from one place to the other, you can literally feel the difference. So keep that in mind, that not everybody has as much clean air as we do. We're really, really lucky because we live in an area where, one, it's covered by trees, and two, we as a state take our nature and our trees very, very seriously. And we have a lot of people who love that. So just keep that in mind. Okay, so moving into the large surface area, thinking about how much space, okay, it can have, the more space that it can touch and the more air it can come in contact with, the more oxygen is going to be able to flow into those red blood cells. So the alveoli greatly increase the surface area of our lungs. If they were cut open and spread out evenly, the alveoli would cover in an area of the size of a tennis court. Now that is really amazing to think about. If we were to open up all the alveoli and lay them flat, that's how many, that's the surface area. So that's how much oxygen is reaching every time. Capillaries are very tiny blood vessels that surround each alveoli cluster so that the blood can pick up large amounts of oxygen. You've heard the term capillaries before. Like we said, little blood vessels, they cover the alveoli so blood can pick up large amounts of oxygen. So these are vocal cords. This is not available, but it was just going to show you how to open and close the vocal cords. It's okay. So that in a nutshell, let's see if this video is still functioning. No, it's not going to work. Okay. So that in a nutshell is the respiratory system. And I've already done these videos, so we're not going to do it again. But I think we're going to end there for today. We're about 18 minutes early, so I think that is a pretty good place to stop. We are going to be in small group. We're going to be practicing labeling the lungs. We're going to have a chance to practice labeling and playing a quiz. And then there is a respiratory game that we're going to play. And it's going to bring in a little bit more about the circulatory system, because the respiratory system and the circulatory system, which is the heart and how the heart pumps blood out to the body, that they work very, very closely together, because the heart and the lungs need to be right next to each other so that the heart pumps all that oxygenated blood out to the body and brings in the rest of it, right? Marina, can you, which lab? The human digestion lab? That was due on Monday? There's a video in the announcements that I've posted of the lesson that I went through yesterday. So if you want to watch that video really quickly, and then if you still have questions, feel free to reach out to me and ask, okay? Great. Well, that's everything I have for you guys today. If you have any questions, please let me know. Otherwise, I look forward to seeing you guys in small group this week.